Hey guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Small Talk Big Ideas. It's your boy Ming with you today again, and we've also got Brian and our guest for today. We've got the oh man, this guy is no stranger to to your screens. I'm sure you guys have seen him in articles and videos. We've got Melvin Poh with us as well. So yeah, before we kick it off, how have you been, gentlemen? How's life been? How's it been treating you?
It's been quite interesting to say the least. I mean, obviously we've been in a lockdown period, so quite a few phases of different experiences from the direct lockdown of being at home to slowly getting out there and to the current stage. And it feels like almost every week something is new. And it's been quite an experience really for me personally, as well as for our work as well.
Yeah. Oh man, dude. That's the best way to describe what's been happening now.
Yes. Yeah.
Brian, how have you been, Brian?
I'm good. I'm good. Just busy with work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I
this
guess
is really interesting.
Melvin, for those who doesn't know who you are, maybe you could give a little brief intro.
Sure. Yeah. So I am the founder of the Asian Entrepreneur. We are you could say a knowledge platform. So in a similar way to Wikipedia, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a global database of the business knowledge in Asia. Now, we're a bit different because we don't do it in the conventional media approach. What we do is we focus on crowdsourcing all the content that we can directly from the practical experiences, the insights, and also the personal wisdom and the knowledge of people throughout the region. So how we do that is we have an open platform, open access to literally contribute. And also we aim and we strive to make it open access for people to basically read it and even participate. So to date, we have produced, I think, close to 1 million articles already, if not at 1 million. And we have about 1,300 people contributing every single month at this point. So it is quite an interesting project in that sense, where it's really something that is a global initiative and it's really democratic in the sense that anyone can be involved. So our job really is to try and curate the entire thing, not so much to intervene, but really to set up a platform where people can participate, and we just do, we stand back and all we do is just to make sure everything runs smoothly in that sense. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, man. The Asian Entrepreneur has been around for how many years now?
At this point, 8 years. Yeah.
8 years. Oh my goodness. All right. And before we jump into that, let's talk about you before all of this, right? And so I mean there are articles, and every superhero has a origin story. So we've seen and we've read your stories as well, of how you started off as you were pursuing law, going to become a lawyer, I believe.
Yes.
Then,
Yeah. More or less.
and then I guess life took a interesting turn, and you started up. You jumped into something else completely. But I mean, since you've told that story like I don't know 1,000 times now, what would your highlights of that whole journey to landing at where you are now in the Asian Entrepreneur and all of that? What would the kind of key highlights be, besides the fact that you was going to do law and then also end up doing something completely different, the things that you
Yeah.
started with a friend back then? Yeah, just give us a quick sort of like run through of that.
Yeah. Wow. Perfect. You've summed it up more or less. Yeah, I would say there are 3 highlights. So one of the major highlights of my journey was my initial failure. I think that was a very big highlight. That was a very traumatic experience. So as you've mentioned, I was originally pursuing law. I was even a lawyer. I've made some savings really. And then I was given an opportunity to start a business, and that failed terribly. And although we always read about failure, to actually go through failure in the sense of actually, putting all your heart and soul into something, and even your money into something and losing it, and having all your assumptions wrong because we're always so optimistic, that was really traumatic. And in a way, that was a highlight because that was a catalyst really for change, because I felt really dissatisfied with what happened. I felt really miserable. But at the same time, I also decided to do something about it, to really explore why it happened. And that was really the foundation of the beginning of our work. So that would be one of the highlights. The second highlight would be, it sounds weird, but initial success was a highlight as well. So after the failure, we ended up starting a print publication, and we were based in the United States at the time. And at the time, we achieved relative success within about 2 years, in the sense that we broke even. We were technically running as a business. As a young person, I'm sure all of us can relate. It was a very interesting experience to finally be at a point where your ideas are more or less validated and you sort of feel a sense of comfort. But that was a highlight too, because then I experienced the sort of, how do you call it? The stagnation of comfort, in the sense where everything was comfortable, but you start to realize that maybe this is not a good state to be in. Maybe you shouldn't be comfortable. Maybe there's more to be done. Rather than settle on the comfort, maybe there's much more to do. And it was at that point where we were trying to think, how do we expand? And eventually, after that sort of critical thought and experimentation, we decided to go into our current route. So that was a highlight as well. Then I would say the third highlight really would be, even now, today, actually, in the sense that we are now starting to see this thing take a life of its own. And then I would say that's moving beyond the sense of failure, success, and moving beyond the sense of self. It's now a bigger initiative than yourself. It's certainly a bigger initiative than me. I guess I have the luck and the privilege of talking about it, but in a sense, I can't be accountable for all of the work today, because this thing has now taken a life of its own. To see people interacting with it on its own, to see it running in its own sense, that really is quite humbling in a sense, and also quite interesting to see how this thing has grown to become. So I would say those are the three highlights really of this journey that not a lot of people really know.
Oh man, dude, and then I think we just end the episode today, guys.
Pleasure to me.
All right. I think so. Before we jump a little bit more into that, because I think there's so much to unpack, based on even those 3 points, right? And the whole journey of, I think, failing and getting up again and then doing it all over again, and then talking about where you are now. Before we jump into all of that, let's get to know the Melvin I guess people don't really know as well, right?
Cool.
So we've got some quick fire questions for you. You can answer them as briefly or as in depth as you like.
Okay.
But these are just for fun, so people get to know who this guy is behind all of the busy days, right? So the first one is, what was the last question or thought that kept you up at night?
Well, last night was really a decision of dinner. What should I have? The Burger Lab or KGB?
Nice.
Really
Okay.
and, funnily enough, that is actually quite a challenge for, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, because a lot of us tend to not really plan our meals that well, because we get so stuck with the work. So that was a really big decision, actually.
Okay.
And Burger Lab is better, actually.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Can we just shout out to Burger Lab, guys?
Yes, I know they were on the show as well. Yeah, Burger Lab.
What is an interesting fact that not many people know about you?
Okay, this is a surprise to many, but I'm actually Malaysian. But I call myself an alien because although Malaysian, I've only just moved to Malaysia about 3 years ago. So I've never really lived here previously.
Where were you born? Where were your parents
So
from?
I was born in KL. My father is from Ipoh, but after I was born, I went abroad and I never came back. And I was even working there until 3 years ago. So it's rediscovering my roots, Ramly burger to mamak and everything.
Yes.
So it's been quite a journey, really. And that's another journey that not a lot of people know, this journey of self-discovery of the roots. Yeah.
Okay.
Where are you mainly based now?
I'm mainly based in KL and Singapore. So I travel between these two places, living between them on a week-to-week basis. And it's close, but very different worlds, certainly. Very different
worlds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think let's I mean, the question I want to ask you maybe before, forget the quick fire questions. I'm interested in the bigger stories now. So you've spent, like you said, you were born in Malaysia. You were, I guess, you grew up in like a ton of other places. Like you were in the States, you were in England, stuff like that. And then you started your career overseas as well. And with all of that sort of like journey and potential and wherever you landed on, what made you decide to come back to Malaysia?
I think I've always had a yearning to go to Asia. I guess it's more like maybe an intrinsic thing, because I am Asian, but I guess I've always had a sense of lost identity. I didn't really know who I was, so there's always a yearning. But the opportunity came with this business, with this mission that we're on. So about 3 years ago, we actually we received the instruction initiative from our partners to actually set up offices in Asia. And it made a lot of sense because before 3 years ago, our headquarters was actually in London, yet we were covering Asia and we're doing all these different initiatives in Asia. So that really gave me the opportunity to finally come. But to get back to the question, I guess my obsession with Asia really comes from my sense of identity, or the lack of identity, really. And that really was what drove me here.
Then what would you say this the Asian entrepreneur is your main venture now? Like, are you doing anything else?
So a great question, because not a lot of people are familiar with it. So the Asian Entrepreneur is an open access platform, and open access in the sense that we don't really monetize it. We don't have a paywall subscription, which is one of the main ways to monetize this sort of setup of a business model. We also don't really do sponsored content or advertising, really. We do have some small ads here and there, but again, it's so minuscule in terms of the revenue contribution. And the main way that we actually make money is that we have actually expanded into other verticals. And so what we do now is we do publishing, not just in terms of writing the articles you see on the platform, but more like working with authors to actually source more codified text. So we're talking about books that are really thick for academic and also for general public as well. So we source these book deals and work with Western publishers to publish them. Then the other thing that we really do, which is really a cornerstone of our work, is private equity. So we help Western investors source deals throughout Asia. And also we set up a fund a couple of years ago to directly be involved in the investment of ventures throughout Asia. The amazing thing about these other verticals, these other businesses that are all attached to this brand, is that we don't dilute the media work or the knowledge work that we're doing, because there's no conflict of interest. It doesn't affect the integrity of the content, which is really important, because you know, the thing is, if we have a paywall, then the problem becomes that not a lot of people can access it. And if we have sponsored native advertising, as they call it, then the problem would be that the content value wouldn't be very good, because then a lot of it would be commercial. So we want to maintain the integrity of the content. And what we have done is we've gone into other verticals, but again, all under the same, more or less the same brand, but different sorts of work.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think sorry, go ahead.
So when you mentioned running this whole the Asian Entrepreneur, what would be some of the struggles maintaining it, since it's a non-profit platform? And also, like, paint us a picture on like who are these contributors to your website, to your platform?
Oh, fantastic. Sure, I'll answer them in a different order because they fit. So who are the contributors? The contributors are technically anyone. So when we first started in the United States as a print publication, at the time we started at Harvard University. So we were really tied with the academic scene there. The problem was that our approach was really traditional. It was actually a problem. So the approach was, we really vetted who the authors were, and we paid them as well. So we had to vet them carefully. Now, the problem with that is that although the authors are all great, we had some professors, we had some great business commentators from the academic circle, the content was only of a certain type. It's great, some people like it, but it doesn't apply to everyone. So we realized that when you create that sort of traditional editorial structure where you have this funnel, more or less, this filter, where you have the editorial team filtering what comes in and what is produced, you only create a certain type of content, which might appeal to a niche, but not to everyone. So now we have gone to an approach where we allow anyone to theoretically contribute. They can be anyone from a person who is running, let's say, a business for a few years, a person who is, a professional of a few years, or anyone really, and they can contribute on this platform. And our job really is to try and make sure that the content isn't, not valuable in the sense that it's not commercial, it's not frivolous, it's not misleading or fraudulent. And if that criteria is met, we allow it to be published. And the beauty of it is that we saw a major departure from our previous model is that people actually love it and they find value in it. And that's the thing, people can actually learn something from each other. The assumption that you can only learn something from the so-called smart people from, let's say, an academic circle is absolutely wrong. because knowledge really isn't just theoretical, academic. Knowledge is practical, and knowledge is all encompassing. So we changed that model. Now, the challenge is that when we allow any person to contribute, then there's a challenge as well of how do you set the criteria of what is valuable? And that is always a challenge for us. Some organizations have done it much better, like Wikipedia. Now, for us, we are still not at that level yet in terms of the critical mass, but what we do is that we just, we work really hard to make sure that the people submitting the content are actually doing well. So most of the staff that we pay for are actually in the editorial team. And we have this broad guideline that they follow. And as long as it fits the guideline, we publish it. And if we very obviously and blatantly detect something wrong with it, we don't really publish it. So the core of the work is still an editorial, but it's a bit more democratic than before in terms of allowing who to publish. But it is very challenging. And then the other aspect of the challenge as well is that being so dedicated to the social mission of it, which is to try and create greater access to knowledge, it is very difficult because we can certainly, I think, monetize much better if we go down the commercial route. So before we discovered the other verticals, it was really difficult to sustain ourselves, actually. We had to previously back then focus on events and other things, just to the scraps, really, just to get by before we got to our current setup. So that was a challenge, really. But being dedicated to it, I think, is also what allowed us to survive, because I think a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start a business, they might have principles, but those principles might change because of money. But for us, because our principles were headstrong, I think we have really carved our reputation in the international community, where people do trust us as a source of this valuable knowledge, rather than just another news site or another, generic business media website. So that dedication has really paid off, more or less. It was challenging, but it paid off.
I'm honestly so. I mean, if there's one thing that I feel stands out from from everything you just shared, is actually your heart, and your heart for your education, for sharing knowledge and stuff like that, which is, I guess, one of the cornerstones as well for why, and I mean, one of the founding. So the fundamentals of how you even started the Asian Entrepreneur, that you saw that there was a need for resource, for knowledge, for sharing. And I guess 8 years ago, realistically, with the internet, I mean, it's not like 8 years ago the internet didn't exist, but I guess resource-wise, for a market a growing market in Asia, we always had to depend on business articles and I guess text from the Western sphere, right? And I think what you saw as a gap in the market also, I guess, dude, that like so much of your heart is put into what you're doing now, and that's amazing for an entrepreneur. And I think, something you just mentioned as well, for I guess the principles that business owners and entrepreneurs may have at the start. Sometimes is unfortunately or fortunately changed because of factors like money, pressure, expectations and stuff like that. Having come into what you're doing now with the Asian Entrepreneur, and I think this is a very big question that I feel needs to be asked, is because you mentioned that in the first few years, it was difficult for you guys to even, I guess, sustain yourself. And you guys were doing like you mentioned, events and stuff like that. Was there a point in the business where you had, I guess maybe as you were discovering the verticals of the different verticals that bringing you in more money or being more lucrative, was there I wouldn't say temptation, was there a conversation you had internally to be like, what, this seems to be more lucrative, this seems to be bringing in more, I guess, revenue, should I start to pivot and focus on this one instead of still doing this pro bono, not very lucrative effort?
Yeah, definitely, because although usually I'm interviewed for the business, the organization that we have, I do have other partners, and everyone has their own views of things. Unfortunately, the current society, the global society that we live in today, how most economies are set up, it's technically a world that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So everything has to run on money, and that's a necessity. I think when we were doing it, the transition from going from a print publication to this online model, there was a lot of conflict within myself and my team as well, because a lot of my partners were thinking, look, if we develop this further on as just a traditional media business, we'll probably make much more. And there was a lot of debate about whether we should leave that model for something that is radically very different. So there was a debate there. Then later on, when we moved on, there were also many opportunities as the brand grew from stakeholders, from other people approaching us to try and monetize. And you'd be surprised. There are so many people that are trying to monetize in all sorts of ingenious ways. A lot of it actually conflicted as well with our mission. And there was also a lot of debate and a lot of conflict during then. Again, not because some of the people in the team involved are greedy, but it's just from a standpoint of how do you sustain and grow. Everything we know about the world is that to grow something, we're told that you need money, and technically that's true. So how do we do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize? I would say we were actively looking for a way that would not affect what we're doing, and we have stuck to it generally. In most of our opportunities, or the temptations, as you called it, we never really gave in to it. That's why I think it was especially difficult for us for quite a while, until recently with the current setup where it makes more sense. But I'm glad that we didn't actually fall into the temptations. I mean, there were quite a few, but I'm glad that we didn't actually go ahead with them, because they certainly would have changed how we operate. But it's funny because the way I'm talking about it makes it sound like, oh, we're so smart and somehow we knew what to do, and that's why we could maintain our integrity and still be the current sustainable setup we have. But in reality, it was a lot of confusion and a lot of conflict and a lot of debate. And yes, a lot of people were tempted, myself included, tempted in the sense that at certain points you wonder, is this going to work? Is this going to survive? Perhaps I'm in the wrong because everyone's doing things in a certain way. But ultimately, I guess it was a gut feeling that we all stuck to, that we didn't give into these temptations. And that's why we were able to surpass them.
Wow, that's incredible, man.
So, Melvin, through all these experiences, how do you actually handle adversity and doubt? And how do you know when you're taking the right step or the right idea?
Funny thing is, I'm still learning about it. But how do I know I'm taking the right step? To be honest, half the time I don't know, and I'll just be absolutely honest with you. What I do know is that there are certain things I believe in, and my partners believe in, and we constantly remind ourselves of those things. For example, what I do know is that there's a massive problem with the market. So what Ming mentioned earlier about how, when you do a business, you can read business text and it's valuable. What he said is true, but to an extent, because the problem before is that, as Ming has mentioned, there's a lot of business text. But the thing is, if I go to, I don't want to name competitors, but if I go to, let's say, a certain business website, or I buy a certain business magazine, it's not going to be very valuable. I mean, it's going to tell me how the economy of a certain place is like, or it's going to tell me, for example, let's say digital marketing industry is growing by this, this is this. But it's also macro, that if I were really to start the business, honestly, I wouldn't have learned much besides how the environment is roughly like. And what really is needed is practical experience and insights exchange, where, let's say today, obviously Ming and yourself, you guys are established YouTubers. If I were to become a YouTuber, I would probably talk to you and I'll ask you, what do you think how is it actually like to be a YouTuber? What are the challenges? What are the experiences? What are the key things that you learn? These sort of insights, the practical ones, are the ones that really help with starting a business or being successful in a business, I think. And that's the problem with most media platforms as well as organizations, that they're not to cater to this, or they're not catered to this effectively. So I realized that we have this market problem where what we really need is a place where people can openly exchange these experiences and these insights with one another democratically. So for example, if let's say Ming wants to share something about being a YouTuber, he would probably have to find a media organization that would allow him to share or accept his request to share. And it's always been so undemocratic. What we really need is an open access platform where everyone can contribute, and we grow this platform together and then really tap into the collective experience of the region. That's how we can grow as a region. So to answer your question, yeah, we've always realized that there was this problem there was also this need really for this thing. So we've been committed to build this thing, and that's also why we went from a print publication to this digital platform that we have today, is because a print publication cannot really do this, and the traditional models can't really do this. What can really do this, I'm just going to openly admit it, is Wikipedia. They can do it, and they've certainly done it to their own approach in a different way. But a lot of things to learn from crowdsourcing. I mean, we live in now a world where everything is more or less interconnected. The concept of peer-to-peer is pretty much the norm. And there's so much value to get out of it, from transportation to, logistics to almost everything you can imagine, hospitality, everything. The sense that we can all connect together and get value out of it. So I think that's the thing that we've always believed in. And that's why that's the thing we've always been striving to move towards. The future really for us now going forward is to make this even more open access, to invite more people to participate in the editorial in the same sense that Wikipedia is doing it. They have a brilliant model of doing it. So we want to do something similar, but you need an incredible amount of people to participate to get to that level. A self-sufficient system powered by peers, by people, collective. So that's what we're moving towards. And that's pretty much why every time we've seen a temptation, we didn't want to track back. And there's so many, especially in Asia. I don't want to shame anyone or anything in particular, but you have a lot of these people trying to make a quick buck, and they want to plant these content here and there, these frivolous events and all that. And it's sad because people don't realize that a lot of them are actually frivolous, but we don't work with people like that, and we try to really commit to the value of the platform we have now.
I love that, dude. Oh,
I
especially like that last point you brought up, which actually I feel is something that we should quickly talk about, right?
Yes.
You've been in and amongst, I guess, very successful people. Not mentioning them, of course, yourself as well, right? But you have seen what it takes to build a successful business and empire. You've met people of different cultures all around the world, and even in Asia itself, and you've seen the amount of effort and toil that is put into building something that's substantial, right? And I think with the current sort of like everybody wants to be their own man, everybody wants to own their own business sort of mindset in this generation in particular, what are your thoughts on people who are so focused on the idea of owning a business, so focused on the idea of self-made success, that they fall prey to stuff like, like everything you just mentioned just now, all these funky YouTube videos. They're like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to make 5 figures in 2 weeks.
I think we all know which YouTube ads we're talking about.
Some of my favorite ones sometimes.
Yeah. We all know. I mean, everyone knows. Great question. I think, okay, and the reason why I have a basis in answering is, of course, we interviewed so many people. In fact, we've interviewed you guys even, and it's a fantastic thing. I read the article from a couple of years ago. It's great. I think the current generation, myself included, and you guys, you could call, some people call it Gen Z, some call it the millennials or whatever. We're born in different circumstances. Our parents before us, a lot of them have to work to survive. No matter who you are or where you deem yourself in some sort of economic status, we are all technically better off than our parents, because they have worked before they gave birth to us, and they have established to some extent something, a livelihood. So I think the collective culture for many of us is that we don't realize the importance of survival and having to actually work for something to survive. So a lot of people are just trying to build something of their own. Whereas in the previous generation, just having something that allows you to survive is enough. And there's great value in that. But a lot of people today, perhaps being slightly more, privileged than the 4 generations, they tend to be more liberal, and they want to do a lot of things, discover themselves, go on some retreat in a desert or somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's also kind of a wrong assumption to assume that starting a business is just an escape, because in reality, it really isn't an escape. And as you guys would know, there's a lot of challenges involved. There's lots of hard work involved. I don't often like to quote Steve Jobs, but one of the key ingredients of, as cliche as it sounds, of success and entrepreneurship that we see in our work is passion. And I think Steve Jobs put it the best, because basically he said why it's passion. The reason why we keep saying it's passion is because this is probably the toughest thing you could actually do if you're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Of course, we have some, you could say some entrepreneurs or some illegitimate entrepreneurs who were just doing it to sort of, you know, fit the Instagram lifestyle, the photos and everything. But if you truly want to build something of value, it is very, very challenging, probably more challenging than just getting a job. Yeah. It's psychologically toiling. It is incredibly exhaustive. So passion is really needed. If you don't believe in what you do, you really won't survive it, because it's the toughest thing you could really do. And then the second thing that is very interesting as well is that a lot of people, they are, you know, trying to become an entrepreneur, and they think, you know, it's a great thing. They can create value, you know, for the world, and they want to create a legacy maybe. But the reality is, I think one of the main reasons why many fail, and many young entrepreneurs fail, is that they don't realize that central to your business, you have to have a key ingredient. And that's something you see in almost every single successful startups generally, and those are the one that we've discovered, is that you need to make sure that you are actually either meeting, you know, a market need, or you're fitting an existing gap that exists. So what I mean is, you know, we talk about starting a business, but the question is your business even valuable? Have you actually really thought about it? Oftentimes it really isn't. Oftentimes many entrepreneurs, especially in Asia, they just think they see a successful business overseas, and then they think, oh, it doesn't exist here, so I'm going to take it here and develop more or less the same thing that's going to be successful. Oftentimes it isn't, because the local needs of every market and the local gaps that exist for every market is slightly different. So why I mention these two things is, of course, we have a lot of young people who want to be entrepreneurs and they think it's really great, but oftentimes they fall short. They're not truly passionate in the sense that they can actually overcome all the adversities that are really intrinsic to the process. It's not like escaping to a tropical island, sitting there and being cool, as much as those certain YouTube ads will tell you. It doesn't work that way. And secondly, the question is, even with what you're doing, you also have to make sure that it's actually solving something or actually creating something of value. And that's also a very difficult thing. That's the only way that you can really sustain. Otherwise, you'll only sustain from funding, either from yourself, your parents, or investors. Otherwise, you can't sustain at all. You have to make sure that you're developing something valuable that draws value, and that's how you can really survive as a business. Yeah.
All right. Just getting back to basic understanding for those watching and listening out there, the differences between entrepreneurship and business owners, like what do you think are the key differences and what makes entrepreneurs?
Sure. I think it's interesting because most entrepreneurs, if not all entrepreneurs, are business owners, but not all business owners are entrepreneurs. I'm not trying to sell a course or anything. It sounds very quotable, but the reality of why that's the case is because, you know, let's start with a business owner. A business owner just means someone who owns a business. But just because you own a business or you're in a position of ownership does not necessarily mean you're entrepreneurial. You could have inherited the business. You could have been promoted to that position of ownership, a variety of ways, or you could just have started at some point, but somehow, you know, you are the owner, just giving the money to someone to develop it for you. So the point is, not all business owners are entrepreneurs, and not all of them are entrepreneurial, which is having the qualities of an entrepreneur. Now, the definition of an entrepreneur, again, not according to dictionary, but just according to our work, is a person who is able to identify market opportunities and problems, and who is a problem solver at heart, and he works creatively to create solutions to that. In many ways, creativity is a core component of it, being able to think out of the box. Resilience is a component of it, persistence as well, and also, most importantly, you know, having a sense of innovation as well to how you approach it. So entrepreneurs are people like that, and being entrepreneurial is having these qualities. And most of the time, obviously, entrepreneurs, they would start a business to achieve what we just mentioned. So they are easily business owners, but not all business owners are the same. I think with the current crisis that we're seeing, it is very interesting because with the current COVID-19 situation and the world on lockdown, you know, a lot of businesses are dying, as we see the headlines every day. And I think the ones that survive are the ones that are entrepreneurial. And this is really the test, because the test is, even if you're in a position of ownership, what if you meet an adversity? Are you able to actually have entrepreneurial qualities to take your business and your organization to the next level in order to survive and also to capture the next competitive advantage? That's not something that everyone has. Not everyone has the ability to do that. So that, I would say, would be the difference. You know, a business owner could just be a person that doesn't necessarily have these qualities. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you could describe to us like what's a typical day-to-day routine like for an entrepreneur like yourself, and like for yourself, what are your responsibilities in the business?
Sure. In terms of day-to-day, it depends on which stage of the journey they're at. But let's say if they are just about to start out, I think the cheat sheet would be that they would be studying the market, maybe perhaps from a stand-back standpoint, or maybe they have experienced certain things, then they see the opportunity. Then they would do the research to discover, okay, what sort of solutions they can come up with. And then they would actually start to develop it, maybe perhaps get a team together, depending on whether they're going from the lean approach, where they're doing it from a bootstrap way, where they're in the garage, or they come up with a business plan and get investors involved and then start to do it, and then start to develop. And then once they have started up, the day-to-day really is to try and, first of all, make sure that the organization is survivable in the sense that they're developing a business model that can actually monetize and stay afloat. And then they strategically plan what to do next. Now, for myself, day-to-day is slightly different because, again, different industry. But for me, I constantly work very often with our team, our different teams, to make sure that our initiatives are met. The one I'm most active in at the moment is actually in private equity, where I work with our private equity firms to make sure that we are making the right deals in terms of investments in Asia, and especially now in the post-COVID world, the entire landscape has changed. So we are trying to do our best to, you know, capture value out of it as well. It's a very interesting period for us, actually. So yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to pick your brain on something that you mentioned earlier on about being in like a self-made entrepreneur, business person, right? When you're converting something that you're passionate about into your main craft, your main sort of industry, right? What has your personal experience been when you've approached a season of like, you know, burnout, or you feel like, man, this is like it's tough, right? Because, you know, sometimes if for example, if I draw as a hobby and I leave my full-time job to draw full-time, I will probably end up hating drawing very quickly. Has that been the case for you when it comes to seeking, categorizing, and sharing information and knowledge? Have you ever reached a point where you're like, dude, I'm ready to tap out?
Yeah, definitely. I faced burnout many times throughout my journey, and I don't think anyone can avoid the burnout. And in certain phases of the startup as well, of the entrepreneurship journey, you would feel burnout perhaps more intensely. In the beginning, especially when we didn't really get the sort of response in the very beginning when we were still establishing ourselves, it was incredibly daunting, because there were many times where, again, our scale was not very big at the time. I had to do many things myself, my partners included, and then those are not getting much results, and then you start to question everything. And then even today, where we are established, but there's so much to do and so many developments, it's a constant. I sort of see it as a very cyclical thing, like sort of answering Brian again to the previous question related, is that I see the process of being, we identify problems, we solve it, we kind of enjoy it for a bit, we identify problems again, it just keeps going again and again. The way my partner put it was really great. It's like we're in a Chinese-made submarine that's very bad quality, and it's constantly leaking, so we're patching it to make sure it doesn't leak and we drown. How I have personally handled it is, in the beginning, I wasn't very good at handling it, and I would feel constantly very stressed out, and people around me would feel it. Nowadays, I learn how to turn off when I need to. So I think that's one thing that's really hard to learn, which is that sometimes, let's say you're faced with a problem with your startup or your business, and then you're thinking about it constantly. That's actually not very good, because I think your psychological state will keep deteriorating, that you won't really think in the best, most rational, efficient way. sometimes it's really best to just step back, turn off for a bit, and then go back to it. This approach I've applied more or less to how I handle burnout, in a sense that sometimes when I feel really, really stressed and a lot of things happening, when the weekend comes or whatever, I just turn off and I just do my own things, and something that's away from business, and I get back to it again. Something as simple as that has really helped me quite a lot, really, just learning how to turn off. I think that's a key difference between working a job, like in the corporate world, and also being an entrepreneur, is that unless you're told to OT in a corporate job, you turn off when you're off work.
Yeah.
But then being an entrepreneur, given that the whole thing is so personal, you think about it constantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And learning to turn off is something that not a lot of people talk about, but it's also something that's not easy to do. But I've more or less learned to do it now more effectively than before. So that's a good thing. And I have a support system. You know, I have loved ones, I have friends, and I have my own hobbies as well. So things that I try and do just to make sure that I'm okay. And that's allowed me to go longer. It's better to make sure that you have a fuel reserve rather than just keep on going forward with no breaks. It doesn't work. And you might not be in the best state to make decisions if you are.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a really good piece that resonated real good.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys feel the same thing. I mean, building this entire thing from scratch, we all can relate to it as entrepreneurs, and it's an important thing, really. No one really talks about it, really.
Yeah. I think just before I think we can start wrapping up this episode, but I just want to hear some of your thoughts on I think we've talked about things before the current situation of COVID-19. You know, we talked about things after, but let's just kind of dwell on where you think the market is going to be heading into after. So I think we mentioned like a lot of we're seeing lots of shops and brands, big brands, all closing down, F&B outlets as well. But for something that's, I guess, sorry guys, my throat's real bad. Okay.
This is what you need. Again, I don't work for Burger Lab. I don't work for the alley, but
yes,
it's fantastic.
I guess the question is really just like, how are you better preparing yourself and your team across, I guess, all your ventures to deal with an environment where we could very likely be going into a massive economic downturn, right? What are you doing, and what are your efforts being placed onto right now in gearing to a brand new sort of like environment with, COVID moving forward?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think COVID is really a resetter. It's so funny how we had a lot of insight sharing lined up, but then just with this COVID, everything will change, and the sort of narrative that you put forward will be totally different. COVID certainly isn't the only and also the first sort of global economic crisis that's happened and that's caused a downturn. Yeah. But it's also it's actually one of the rare few that has a very transformative effect, just because of the nature of what it is, which is a pandemic, and the sort of responses that has happened on a global scale with all countries locking down. That has changed the landscape entirely and transformed almost all industries immediately, pretty much from the point that the lockdown started globally. So it is a very different environment. And for many businesses that are faced with this situation, if they have the assumption that things are the same and they can do the same thing, they're absolutely wrong. They have to change. They have to change in order to survive. A lot of things that they had before probably does not work in the same way anymore. And that's one thing that people have realized. That's something that we realize personally ourselves as well. There are certain industries that are doing better in this current situation. And there are certain industries that will rise from the situation just because of how the landscape is conducive to them. But many industries will either need to transform to survive, or many of them will outright just die, more or less, because of how the landscape is different. But this change is certainly permanent. The ones that are prone to really benefit from this, ourselves, we're one of them, because in terms of online content and online media, obviously with the lockdown, more and more people are forced to be at home and consume content online. So the nature of the industry that we're in, and yourself included, YouTube, as well as the show itself, these things are set up to basically to be more adopted than before. But how we're approaching it and how we're really trying to gain the most out of it is that we realize that it's during this period of time that a lot of people are more or less very lost. They don't know what to do. They're very confused. A lot of them are business owners. A lot of them are maybe entrepreneurs that just started, and all of a sudden COVID happened. And how are they going to survive? What's going to happen? And this is a period of time where people really need to share experiences with one another. So almost from the get-go, we have tapped straight into this. We have really asked our editorial team to really source a lot of practical content on the virus and the pandemic and insights of the entire thing. And so I'm very glad to say, actually, during this period, we have seen record high traffic compared to ever before. So the point being that we have actually adapted our content to fit this pandemic. And this is the first time we ever had to do it. In the past, we never had to specifically focus on an area, but this time we did, and we benefited from it. The benefit for us is great, but what it also means is that people are getting value out of it. So that's how we have really done it. And previously, because we have offices in 5 countries, but most of our writers are already working remotely. So in terms of the organizational setup, structure and capability, we didn't really have to change too much. But other verticals are very affected. So for example, we're involved in private equity, which is investments. The deal flow and the investments of this year is totally slowed down, if not stopped. And also, obviously, we don't do events as much anymore, but our partners in events absolutely massacre over there. Besides, obviously, the Zoom meetings, which is great.
Yeah.
It's funny because probably most of us are wearing shorts underneath. But the point being, yeah, it's had a lot of effect, but our core work has actually benefited from it. And this is really a time for us to shine, because this is really a time where we're giving this knowledge out to people that actually need it. And I think it's a great time for us. We have seen growth in this period.
Yeah. Wow. Love that.
I guess just to sum it up, like maybe possibly last question. What key activities would you recommend entrepreneurs or business leaders out there to invest their time in?
Okay. This is now, no matter, I think, who you ask, if they're really legitimately answering the question, they have to tackle the fact that previous advice does not work anymore. Now, if you're starting a business today, you have to take into account the COVID world. First of all, we're not through the forest yet. We're still in it globally. No one's really come out of it yet. Even, let's say, someone like China, where apparently they've come out of it, they've seen resurgence as well. And of course, the restrictions are happening. So to answer your question, we need to understand what's happening. The transformative effect is that we're seeing the entire institutional landscape change. Supply chains are totally different. You can no longer produce things, let's say in China or get from there, or other countries. Borders are locked. Consumer behavior has changed as well. People are now more or less afraid of their health, and more or less, a lot of them in many countries are still restricted at home. So they have resorted to online consumption. So changing landscape as well for the market and how people behave. So for an entrepreneur that's planning to start up now, or for the business owners now, the first thing you have to do is survive. And what I mean is, the first thing is you have to realize that your organization right now is burning money, and maybe some of you are locked down, or maybe some of you are spending money in areas that worked before previously. Now's the time to, first of all, look at your runway, which is a term we use to describe how long you can survive by burning money, and try and minimize the cost. This is why we're seeing businesses around the world, laying off people, is because they need to. Revenue is more or less halted or disrupted, that the cost doesn't make sense. So the first thing for an entrepreneur is to look at how much money you're burning. That's the first thing. Once you solve the burn rate and you make it to a level that is all right, you can actually survive for a few months. Then the next thing you have to do is to look at the market and look at how the market has changed. It's no longer the same. You have to look carefully at it. For example, maybe many of the consumers you dealt with, they are behaving differently now. They expect different things. Maybe the value proposition that you had, like let's say you're offering a value from your business, it no longer applies anymore. It's different. People don't find that valuable anymore. Maybe there are other opportunities. So once you identify, the market and how it is, then the second question is, how can you adapt your business or modify your business to create value for the new reality of the market, to capture the value again? And then this is really a critical step to really develop something that is fitting to the market again. And then finally, the last thing to do is really to change your organization structure so that you can create the value for the market again. So this is the process that we should be looking at right now. Everyone is more or less resetted, more or less actually. So we really have to look at it carefully rather than assume everything is the same as before. It's so funny how if you read an article that was written in January about entrepreneurship and it's well written, it in a span of a month, it no longer applies anymore. It's technically pointless. The stuff that's written there doesn't make sense anymore. And many of the predictions of 2020 for many people, professionally or even personally, does not apply anymore. And we need to go back to the drawing board, look at these things. And it's easier said than done, to be honest. It's easier said than done, but everyone has to really do it. And if you don't do it, then you will not survive and you will not really be able to capture the market again.
Yeah. Oh man, dude, that was Melvin. You are a well of friggin' knowledge, dude. I think we need to get you back on for another episode in the future. But thank you so much for spending a couple of there's almost an hour with us. I feel there's just really so much to pluck from your experiences and your stories. And there's definitely a lot more that we want to ask in the future. I hope everyone who's watching this, hope you guys manage to take away something from the conversation that we had with Melvin, whether it's anything that you can apply for yourself as an entrepreneur or something that you are about to go into. I think there needs to be a lot of, I feel like someone like Melvin, like there's a lot of reflection that I think that's very evident in what you do. There's a lot of thoughtfulness and intentionality as well. Dude, I just absolutely just want to acknowledge that, dude. But yeah, thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we are definitely keen to explore more conversations with you. Is there anything, and I don't know, any last shout outs or any way people can get in touch with you and what you're doing that you just want to tell people about? Yeah.
Okay, so this is my shameless plug, but basically, if anyone is interested in what I've talked about, again, I didn't gain these insights just naturally. I gained it from the insights of the people, that the knowledge that we collect on our platform, which is open access, entirely free for anyone, no conditions, absolutely free. And I welcome anyone to access this knowledge project that we've been building and this database we've been building, and also anyone to contribute and also participate in the conversation. Because in reality, what COVID has taught us is nothing new. It's just the fact that if we all work together, we can actually achieve much more. There's greatness in numbers rather than an individual. And that's really it. So go to asianentrepreneur.org and again, be a part of our journey today.
Oh, I love it, man. Thank you so much, Melvin. And we wish you all the best in everything you're about to do. Hope you have a great week ahead as well, man.
Yeah, thank you.
And for everyone else who wants more episodes, make sure you get caught up with all of the previous episodes we've had on Small Talk Big Ideas. And we will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.